And welcome to the Visioning Workshop. I, Julie Jakubik, along with the Building Planning Committee of Roger Cook, Kyle Hall, Andy Harmon, Mark Jakubik, Mark Salzman, Leroy Toma, Jim Tierney, and Father Vince, want to thank you for your attendance today. It is very important that you are here, as you are all members of St. Olaf, and this is your church. About 6 months ago, our committee looked at local population growth, our church enrollment growth, and our aging facilities. And we determined that it was necessary for St. Olaf's to put together a master site plan. This master site plan will provide a roadmap on what projects will be needed in the future and on what timeline those projects will be completed in. It could be as soon as 5 years or as far out as 25 years. Depending on the cost of the projects, a phased construction timeline would be a possibility. The plan will allow St. Olaf's to grow in a smart and fiscally responsible way. To have a master site plan developed, we interviewed several architecture firms, and we chose Growth Design Group based on their expertise and experience in religious structures. Today we have Paul from Growth Design Group who will facilitate the workshop. He will introduce us to why it's important for our religious buildings to be functional for the programs that we run, and he will engage each of you into sharing your thoughts on our needs, our wants, and things that we think should stay as is. Next week, Paul's team will be conducting building walkthroughs to analyze our existing facilities, and he will be interviewing key building users. He will take all of this information and use it to create several options for a master site plan. Those options will then be reviewed and updated as necessary to reach one final master site plan that Paul will present to us in the fall. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Paul.
Good morning. This is really a nice turnout. I want to begin by thanking you for showing up to be involved in how your church develops its course of action relative to building and support for ministries. I also want to thank you for worship this morning. I came early enough to be able to worship with you. One of the committee members, maybe Leroy, asked if I was actually there, but I sat way in the corner. One of the things that's a challenge about being a church architect is I want to make sure I can see everything, and the best place to see how not only what happens on the platform unfolds during worship, but also how the congregation interacts and how movement works in the space. So I was kind of like the little mouse or the little fly on the wall sitting in the back corner watching and then also participating. So thank you so much for worship. Just to give you a little bit of background. I have been working as a church architect for almost 30 years. Prior to that, I was a pastor. And while a pastor, I learned, working in a church building that did not serve that ministry well, how difficult it is to do ministry, whether it's worship or outreach or counseling or education, in a building that isn't set up for the needs of those ministries. And of course, the building I worked in had been built many, many years before I was a pastor there. And it worked well for the church that built it. But ministries change, and expectations change. And while the things of worship and the truths that are conveyed in worship and ministries do not change, how we do those things, how we carry them out, do change. So part of what we're about today is to understand what are the things that a master plan for you to be the church in Deforest what your buildings and your site have to do to facilitate that, and to hear what you have to say about what is challenging here, what is beautiful here, and who you want to be in the future. Our agenda is very simple. We have a beginning. We have this design presentation. We'll take a short break. If you want to refresh coffee or grab another donut, that's fine. And then the second part, the major part of what we're doing today, is facilitating a discussion amongst you about what works, what doesn't work, what your hopes are, what the future, as you see it, of the parish and the parish buildings are. And then we'll close at the end, give you a little direction on where we're going next, and then send you on your way. I want to begin with a question for you. The biblical writers, when they talk about spirit, they talk about it as having one of two forms. Does anybody know what those two are? You didn't know you were going to get a pop quiz on Sunday morning. What are the forms of spirit that the biblical writers conveyed in their witness? Yes?
Wind.
Wind, or breath, or moving air.
Water.
Not water.
Fire.
Fire. Fire is the second one. Water and fire is how they describe spirit. The form that spirit takes. Now what's interesting about that, particularly from an architectural standpoint of an architect that works with churches, because churches are about spirit. Both wind or breath and fire do not have set form. They are free form. Fire is always different. And wind is always different. And I think that was intentional on the part of the writers of that witness. Now what poses, well, let me just say too, beyond just not having form, if we try to enclose spirit, if you enclose wind, it stops being wind. If you enclose fire, it goes out. It stops being fire. What's interesting from the standpoint of an architect that has to build an enclosure that can contain spirit is if we are not careful about how we do it. If it doesn't have the room to breathe and to change and to grow and to be what spirit is, which is free form and free flowing, we put it out. Now I say this because structures, architectural structures, were built for a specific time and a specific ministry and a specific place. And if it is going to contain spirit that is free form and flowing, it needs to be able to adapt and change as the things around it change, and as the ministries that are housed in it change. And if we don't figure out how to make buildings able to renew and be alive with the Spirit, we can end up losing the very essence of Spirit. So part of the architectural endeavor, part of the master planning process, is not only understanding where you've been and where you are, but where you're going, what your spirit is, and how it will be able to change within the buildings and the site that you have to meet the needs of a new day. Now there are two other symbols. One of them was already mentioned, water, and also the sustenance of the earth. These four symbols I've used to order the discussion or the presentation that I will make to you about the needs of the church. I've used these because these four things, water, fire, air, and earth, are ancient symbols of the church. If you were following, or if you've seen the movies about the Illuminati, the historic movies, the Illuminati were a medieval organization that were very, very clever. This is an interesting diagram that they developed. You can read, it says earth, air, fire, and water. They were very clever. And they designed a lot of their diagrams so that you could read them upside down or right side up, and it said the same thing. At the time that they were most active, people believed, this is prior to science, people believed that the entire earth was composed of these four elements. And the church itself used these four elements heavily in our celebration of the Mass. Fire is often used as a symbol of remembrance. Water, of course, is used as a symbol of cleansing and birth into the family of God. The sustenance of the earth is shared in our celebration at table, providing those things from the earth tied to the promise of God that gives us life and sustains us. And of course, the spirit of wind, which blows inspiration and message and promise to God's people. Now, had the people that developed these symbols lived in Wisconsin, they might have developed a fifth symbol, particularly when we get snow in April. I'm going to use these four symbols to order the relevance of the church building in today's age. So first, the symbol of fire. It is the symbol of remembrance, of promise and hope, light in the darkness. Traditional symbol for that should be on our minds in this season of Easter. It is the vigil fire of Easter as we await the newness of the resurrection. I also believe that it's relevant for how people encounter our churches. That beacon of light that we hold up to the community. Is it visible? Is it clear? When people come into the location of the church? Are they able to understand that it is here calling them, a light in the darkness of the world? Sometimes we light our churches to be that beacon. This is a project I had many years ago in Iowa. And you can see the spire of the original church. They had to build a new church. And when we talked about this piece, we specifically called it a lantern, a beacon, so that the people in that community would know the presence of the church and that it was alive and waiting for them, calling them to come in. Part of the beacon that we present to people is having adequate parking. And parking that is convenient for all people that need to use the space. As a former pastor, this is the sign I like best. But seriously, if you expect people to come, you have to give them a place to park. The diehards that come to church every single Sunday routinely will find a place to park. The visitor, the person who is not quite sure that this is the place for them, or not quite sure that the church has the meaning and the message for them. If they come to a parking lot and cannot find a place for them, they may move on. As an architect, I can analyze what that means. Every municipality has a requirement for the number of stalls that you have to have for the number of seats in worship. Sometimes that's 1 to 6 if it's a large urban area where parking is scarce and you can have lots of streets to park on. For churches that are out in the middle of nowhere where there are no streets that you can park on conveniently, that number becomes 1 stall for every 2 seats. And for a church like this, it will be someplace in the middle. But the importance of having enough parking as a symbol of welcome can't be understated. And let me just say, I use this slide. This is not one of my projects. Not all these projects are mine. I use this one because it is an example of beautiful parking. We have to provide the parking. The journey from your car to where the ministry is occurring can also be an experience of beauty and meaning, if it's designed correctly. As well as the entrance and the pathway up to the church. This is a church, a Presbyterian church in Madison, that had some interesting issues with how they got people from parking to their worship. Part of that was giving people signs as to which door is the best door to go in. This pathway made it very clear. Why is this important? Again, a visitor, you all know where you're going. I sat back by the door in the far corner of worship. Some of you that are members here know that that door exists. The visitor won't. It's always interesting for me when I come to a church for the first time. Churches often have many doors. I can walk up to a door of a church that I think is supposed to be the entry. I can grab it, find out it's locked. Go to the next door. Maybe that's locked. Eventually, I usually find the door I'm supposed to go in. That's okay. I have all the reason in the world to be at that church. The person coming to a church for counseling. that is going through life's hardship may be looking for every excuse not to get help. And if it's not clear where to go for that help, or if they come to what they think is the door for help and it's locked, maybe they won't try the next door. So doorways become incredibly important. Doesn't mean that we have to leave our churches open. We just have to give people cues as to where they need to go to get the outreach and the ministry that gives them sustenance. This is a church that took the idea of opening their church to the community very seriously. They actually opened a side of their worship to invite people in. Churches are, the main design for churches came out of the period through the Dark Ages, or current church designs. That was a time where the outside world was a threat. And so we often built churches as walls to protect those within. This is something that in our day and age is no longer necessary, and in fact the opposite is true. We have to develop buildings that allow people in and remind us of the place of ministry outside of our worship, because we're called to go forth. Doors become important. Canopies become important as symbols for hospitality on the outside of the building and inviting the community to belong and participate. Second symbol, water. The traditional symbol of that is obvious. It is the font. That place where we are born into the family of God and where we are renewed and refreshed every time we enter worship. It was nice to see you had a water experience today in your worship. That can also mean a place to be family. Gathering spaces. I started working as a church architect in 1992. And the people that hired me at that time, the firm that hired me then, didn't know how busy they'd be able to keep a church architect. But it was the start of the birth of gathering spaces in many of the Wisconsin, southeast Wisconsin area churches. And we were incredibly busy because churches found out if they built a place for people to gather before and after worship, it contributed to the vitality and the growth of the church. Being family, building a community is incredibly important, but you need a place to be able to do that. Part of that hospitality experience is refreshments. People build families in community and in their homes around table and fellowship of food and drink. My first church that I served was in Racine, Wisconsin. You could not have church without coffee and Kringle. I was 26. I gained 30 pounds in my first year of ministry. I have not lost them. This is a great example of a church that took a corner of their gathering space and transformed it into a place of refreshment so that people would stay and share coffee and a donut and each other. That space has to be large enough that people can stick around and be the church outside of worship. And very often, that gathering contains the symbol of threshold into sacred space. Opposite that door is this font. This is where you gather and draw people into the community of celebration. And then there is the third symbol, the sustenance of the earth. That which is grown and harvested and sacrificed to give us sustenance. The traditional symbol is, of course, the altar or the table in the center of our worship. How that is placed, where that is, how present it is in our worship spaces is incredibly important if we are a people of meal and sustenance. Getting people visibility to the altar is important. Giving them access to the altar is important. And having them feel like the Mass is not just about watching meal, but engaged in meal. Giving them in their worship, around that table, all of the accommodations that bring depth and meaning to that celebration of food and drink and sustenance. Whether that is devotional places around it, whether that's Stations of the Cross, whether it's art glass, whether it's symbol. When you set a table for guests, how you set that table, how the atmosphere of the room contributes to the engagement and the celebration of meal is incredibly important. We need our churches not only to serve the meal, but to give it meaning and to give it beauty. Creating ample light in the space, and I show you this slide because I've been in your worship, right? There is not a lot of natural light there. The artificial light isn't too bad, but how we arrange people and then give them a place that is hospitable. Studies have shown that education that employs natural light helps children learn much better. Retail. One of the largest retailers in the country is Walmart. And not long ago, they began putting skylights throughout all of their buildings. Why? Because the study's shown whatever they put under the skylights, people bought. The church is no different. Natural light is the way we learn And it's the way we incorporate into our lives those things that are important. Existing spaces can be renewed. This is St. Denis. This is not far down the road. I just completed a project at St. Denis. In fact, your previous bishop, that was the last church that he dedicated. It is a space that in many ways your church reminds me of, partly because of the central skylight that brings in natural light over the altar. They also had a fairly solid surround with some art glass, but relatively a dark worship space. And part of what we did there was to change the presence of the altar. We brought in the tabernacle. The tabernacle had previously not been in the church. That's one of the things that sparked their project, was the bishop's directive to move the tabernacle into the place of worship. And so all of our endeavor was to bring presence of the meal for the people of St. Denis in a beautiful way. Part of that presence is access. This is now a fairly old project, but this owner, or I shouldn't really say owner, that's architectural language. This parish put before us a challenge, considerable challenge, because this is a church built for 900 people. They wanted everything completely accessible, because they understood that in order to participate in the celebration of the liturgy of the meal, if their message was that that meal is for everyone, that everyone had to be able not only to share in the meal, but to be in service in the meal. So they said, we want the main experience of our worship to not be a path of step, because that would exclude. So the entry beyond the font is a gradual ramp that doesn't need rails. Everybody that enters this church can access the church through that ramp. And the altar, this is before the final altar was installed, but the altar also had to be completely accessible, and the primary means to get to the altar had to be accessible, because otherwise a priest who had physical challenges, a parishioner who wanted to serve and support the sharing of that meal, that couldn't access the altar or had to go to extraordinary means to access the altar, would be less likely to serve. Interestingly enough, the church had a setup of serving for the worships. And so every Sunday there was someone or a couple who were listed in this schedule to present the bread and the wine at the altar for the meal. The first Sunday that they were in their building, not the dedication Sunday, but the first Sunday that they were in their building, the person who was designated to bring those elements to the altar was a person who was in a wheelchair. And for the first time, that woman was able to bring it directly to the altar. How we accommodate around the table people of varying ability is an important consideration. And finally, air, spirit, proclamation, promise, however we want to describe it. The traditional symbol is the promise of God through the Word, through the living Word. That is the heart of our ministries. That Word is for everyone. In our churches, part of our responsibility is to make sure that every person who wants to participate or who needs to participate is able to have that Spirit come to them. Changing rooms, nursing rooms, rooms where you can tend to infants. The very first architectural tour of a building I went on was the first time I ever recall being in a women's restroom. And I walked in and I went, wow, they have couches. It was an older church building. We used to provide a place for mothers. Many of our churches anymore don't do that. Some do. I work across the whole breadth of Christian experience. Everything from Catholics through Protestants to non-denominational churches. The non-denominational churches that have seen a significant growth in their churches do two things really well, in my opinion. Hospitality, incredible ministry through hospitality. And parenting. Phenomenal ministries to young families and to children. Why? That's the future of the church. And it's a considerable need in the church. So, giving children and families the assurance of a safe environment, a meaningful environment, and a beautiful environment is a part of a growing church's need. Youth ministries, incredibly important to keep and develop the people who will very quickly take over the reins of the church. This would never happen, right? A line to the women's room in a Catholic church. If we're going to bring people here, we have to care for them. Having adequate restroom space is incredibly important. And restrooms that are accommodating to people of all ability. Places for our social ministries, food pantries, outreach, quilters. I mean, there are hundreds of different ministries that churches engage in, and each of them has needs for space. Places for education, for meetings, office ministries, counseling. All of those things are important if we are a people of spirit. Accommodating the entire breadth of the human community. Maybe not the dog. Well, maybe. Do you do St. Francis blessing?
I haven't done that.
Not yet. All right. Thinking about not only how you will be welcomed, or the people that you know will be welcomed. Deforest is a growing community. There will be a lot of Catholics that will be coming into your community. who will be looking for a church, but they will have other options. They will go where they feel included and welcome. And the non-Catholic that comes here, we sometimes forget our commission as disciples of Christ is not to go forth and bring in just the Catholics. It is to go forth and make disciples of all people. The unchurched or the non-Catholics that help to populate the future of Deforest also need to be on your radar for how you welcome them and bring them inside and make them a part of family. Fire, water, earth, and air. They are the tangible things of the earth, like the architecture. It's tangible. It is not the church, but when it is tied and serves the people of God, the spirit of the church thrives. That's what we're about today, is understanding how can we give your site and your building a shape that will allow the spirit of wind and fire to be alive. So, now about you. I love the fact it snowed this weekend. We're going to take a break, and then we are going to come back. And I'm going to let you discuss what your future may be. What you need, what you want, what we have to maintain, and what is essential to change. So, let's take 5 minutes so you can get up and stretch. If you need to use a restroom, if you need to grab a cup of coffee, if you need to importance of fellowship, giving you a chance to be fellowship, and then after 5 minutes breaking you up and making you come back. But understand that what we are doing here is also about fellowship. There's a reason that I wanted you to be able to see each other as we discuss how your buildings and your site serves your ministries, because this is not about me. I don't have a bag of goods to serve you or to give you, to sell you. Everything that we do in the design of your site and the planning for your buildings is about what you need and want. In the 30 years that I've been practicing as a church architect, I have built churches that serve clients as they want them to be served. Sometimes I don't always agree with their decisions. That doesn't matter to me. I'm there to serve them and help them understand how those buildings find relevance. So this is a part of your fellowship, discussing amongst yourselves what you need and want as a church. Now, in my experience, I know that Catholics are so unruly that we need some ground rules. Everybody gets to participate. If you want to say something, you can say something. Every comment that's made today is valid. No idea is a bad idea. Doesn't mean it's going to happen. It doesn't mean it's affordable. It doesn't mean that the church will decide that it's the best direction, but every comment will be respected today. Share your feelings. We're not going to be debating ideas today. I've had visioning workshops where somebody stands up and says, I don't want any stained glass in the new building, and somebody else stands up and says, I love our stained glass, I want it to be all through our new building. You have a design team to listen and discern what the best course of action will be. So it doesn't matter today if we have differing opinions. We're trying to collect and understand your ideas and the heart of who you are as a parish. Be concise. This is the hard one for me. I often tell my clients the most dangerous thing that you can ever do is give a microphone to a former preacher. We want to make sure everybody gets a chance to say what they want to say, so the more concise you can be, the more people will be given voice. Don't be afraid to dream. This is the hardest one, I think, for most churches. The first step is often, how are we going to afford that? Not, what do we need to be a vital church? The church has always been about vision and has been in the forefront of society in promoting health and wholeness and the growth and the benefit of the people of the earth. And have fun. What we're talking about is building, maybe not building, what we're talking about is strengthening the body of Christ. That ought to be an enjoyable endeavor. So this is our agenda. We're going to spend 8 minutes on 6 different topics. We'll first spend 8 minutes talking about sight and entry, another 8 minutes talking about hospitality and fellowship, another 8 minutes talking about worship and music, another 8 minutes talking about family and the formation of the education and the strengthening of meaning of the church for the people of God. 8 minutes talking about ministry and office or service areas. And then 8 minutes on anything else. If you can't find a category to put something in, that last one is kind of a catch-all. If things come out of place, I'll find a way of working it into the development of the analysis that comes out of this visioning workshop. Everything that is said today, from now on till we get through this discussion, is being written down so that we have a record and nothing is lost. We're not putting names to that, so don't be afraid to stand up and speak. We want to make sure we have ideas and that no idea gets discarded as we deliberate how best to serve you. And Leroy, did we get a timekeeper? You're going to keep time? Great. Throw something. I will lose track of time. You'll see. It's a tough job. That's the hardest job today. So keep us to 8 minutes or we will be here at 4 o'clock. Nobody here wants to be here at 4 o'clock, right? Right? You do.
I agree that we really need more parking, because I know of people that told me that they had to leave because they could not find a parking place that would be closer.
It's tough. It's tough. And it's not always easy to circulate in your parking either.
Yeah. I spoke to Father about that a long time ago.
Great. Other things with sight and entry. Oh, and there are microphones too if you can't hear. So if we don't get a microphone to people, I'll repeat what was said This woman over here just said that she believes parking is a challenge here. Yes.
How much land does the church still own around here? I think we're just letting high school use some of the land around here, but I'm just curious what we still own.
Yes, Leroy, what is the size of the site?
There's 25 total acres.
25 total acres.
That includes the cemetery and the rectory and everything.
So the total property of the church is 25 acres.
What portion is already developed?
What portion is already developed? I'm not sure I have an answer for that, but we'll write it down and we can provide an answer beyond this workshop.
That
Yes?
In vision, will we be taking back the school district? What we rent out to the school district right now to be able to achieve what we want to do?
So what will record? So the question is, will we be giving back the school district land? Right now, or the land that's rented to the school
Will we
district?
be taking our land back?
Right. I don't know that we know that yet, but that'll be a consideration, is how those things all fit together, right? If there's income related to that, if there is necessary, if it's a portion that's necessary that you can't develop any other way, all of that will be part of our discernment. Yes?
Along with the parking, I think the flow of the parking in and out on church days could be much better.
So circulation, both entry and navigating lots, it's one of the things that's a challenge in a lot of churches, is you enter one parking lot area and you think maybe there's going to be a stall there, but there isn't. And then you have to go back through all of the navigation, and that sort of uncertainty about parking ends up clogging the parking, or clogging the drives. Yes?
Our parking lot is very dark.
So-
In the winter, when at 5 o'clock mass on Saturday night, the part that's down by the school here, I think there's one light, it's extremely dark. We have to park around the building too, and it's dangerous if it's icy.
Okay, so two ideas there. One is lighting, and I'm assuming that is safety, and both security and safety, getting into the building, and then navigating ice and treacherous pathway to get where you need to go. Yes?
I have an issue with the handicap stuff around here. To go into, the closest door to go into when you park handicap is the back door. I like going in the front door. To me, that's not comfortable in going in the back door just because I'm handicapped and that's the only way I can go. And then when you get in there, you have to sit down in the front. You have to, well, I had to use a four-wheel walker one time to go to church, and it was scary going down that slanty floor. And then when I got there, I had to have somebody take my walker up in the back of the church because otherwise it's in the way.
Sure. So the comments are, if you provide for accessible participation, or participation of people with all in varying abilities, you have to make sure that it's not just code compliant, but that it is convenient. And so parking that's accessible may not be positioned in a way that gives that person the dignity to be able to enter the same way that everybody enters. And then when you're inside the worship, if you provide handicapped seating, you have to think about the convenience and the safety, or the ability to navigate between that seating, and whether that person will feel in the way or out of the way. Neither of those is particularly inviting. If you're in the way or if you're remote and not a part of the participation. That's a challenge for a church that has a sloped floor. Yes?
I would think too, another thing that would be important is bringing both this space and the church together. Because otherwise you have, in winter, you always have trying to get here. You want to come later.
So the comment is, relative to with multiple buildings, how you get people between buildings in Wisconsin weather, right? And winter is a particular challenge. You have pouring rain in the middle of spring or fall, that's a challenge as well. But if you expect people to connect the ministries of the church and the church building and the ministries of the parish and the ministry building, and they need to work together, asking the question about how those buildings work together is incredibly important.
I would agree also, we need a gathering space between this building and the church.
So having a gathering area that can serve both buildings, or both
Connect.
worship and ministry, and possibly connect them, might be a worthwhile endeavor. Yes?
Obviously, there's a renovation was done in 2001, I think, or 2000. One of the issues was drainage, and it's continuing to be an issue between the buildings. That's as well.
Okay, so the comment is that drainage on the site, particularly between two buildings, is an issue that will have to be addressed as we do planning. Are we at 8:08? One more minute? Yes.
If we are talking about construction building, are we also looking at an alternative site and/or trading with the school district land so that they can go ahead and expand?
So the question is, as we consider the future needs of the parish, will that consideration just incorporate understanding that the church is here, or do we have to also understand potentially how another place might serve the church either better or differently? So consideration of multiple sites. Yes?
I would like to see the entryway bigger, maybe this ties into fellowship. Because you go to other churches, people stick around afterwards and talk and socialize. Here, you're so cramped, you can't hold people up because they're all coming out. And so it kind of diminishes the ability to interact with people.
That's a perfect transition to the second topic of hospitality and fellowship.
You're welcome.
I have to make sure I have money to pay you later. So, one of the things I've discovered, I mean, obviously we can look at a church like your church and say, there's no place for fellowship at the church, right? There's no place for that. I've worked with churches that built fellowship space and didn't build it big enough. If we build fellowship, if we build a place for gathering, it has to have the breadth and the amenities that people will hang out and be the church. If it's too small, even if it's provided, people won't stay. They'll feel in the way. If it's in the middle of circulation, right, so that when you're standing with a cup of coffee, you feel like you're being a burden to people who need to move or go someplace differently, that's a problem too. So how it's designed is incredibly important. It has to be present, it has to be convenient, it has to be large enough, or it doesn't serve the purpose that it would be put there to do. Other things about hospitality or fellowship, yes?
As a member of the Parish Life Commission, I firmly support what we can do for a nice large gathering space and the kitchenette that you referenced in some of your pictures. We would love to do more with food and fellowship at our services, but we are extremely limited right now into a room that serves ushers, brides, assorted junk, barrels for the monthly gathering of food for our food pantry, some handicap accessible equipment, our storage bin, and a changing station for parents. That's where we are gathering our food right now and preparing to serve it to you. We need a bigger space, and I loved those pictures that you showed us.
So the challenge is your ministries over in the church proper get a multi-use space that is overtasked for its capacity.
Mild statement.
Okay. Yes.
I'd like to see something more for the teenagers and young adults as far as the gathering space, games, pool, something fun that's going to have people want to come here to hang out.
So the comment is we have to think about all ages and where all ages feel comfortable. I often tell my clients, I'm old enough, Father, to remember the moon landing. And I don't think it's a conspiracy. We have to make sure that the spaces conform to the ages that we're trying to serve. My age group, the paradigm for fellowship was the VFW, or the supper club. That's not what anybody under 30 right now relates to nearly as well. Noodles, Barnes & Noble, coffee house, providing a place that young people feel is their space and that they feel welcome for how they engage in social ministry. By that I mean communal, building community is incredibly important. We've got to figure out how to get that age group comfortable being in our buildings. Sometimes that means access to Wi-Fi, sometimes that means fluid, flexible spaces. But we've got to figure out what that will be that will help them feel like it is their church and a place that they feel comfortable. Yes?
I think one of the things too that is difficult in their space now is provide information, readily available information on service projects, on what's happening in the church, etc. We're finally getting the website and everything down, but if I want to advertise something or push something service project-wise, there's no space to do it.
So the comment is we've got to have a way of communicating what's happening at the church with the people then that come into our spaces. Again, when I grew up, the way to do that was bulletin boards. I don't know if we ever moved through whiteboards or chalkboards or other things like that. Right now, it is digital display. Most everybody here probably grew up to a large extent with the TV. I'm always amazed if you provide people with a screen and you give them even mediocre content, that people will stand and watch it. We've been trained, right? And it used to be fairly expensive, but it's not expensive anymore, putting in a flat screen TV. And in fact, the challenge with bulletin boards is if you had 5 bulletin boards in the building, you had to change them all. Digital display, one program, you change the program, all of the displays change. You can keep people connected with beautiful image and information very, very easily. You just have to get over that hurdle. Websites are great, social media is great, Facebook, jury's out on that, I think. But, yes?
One more quick, hospitality, you're talking about meeting the needs of a variety of people. Although it will be seasonal, simple playground equipment.
Playground
That's
equipment.
another community building thing. In the different places we've gone, church in Princeton, it's an old building, that's school there. The playground, take a little break on a nice day after you've been at Mass, it's well used.
Great. So the comment is the playground is a community builder as well. I will say, when I work with churches, there's a group of people that usually are advocates for a play area and community play area. They usually in the discussion, there's a comment about how it will look outside of the church. I tend to think if you're serving young children and families and the community, it has to be visible. It may not always be pretty, but it's got to be, that service needs to be on display. And when you bring people, I had one church that talked about putting in a prayer garden and dog walk. When you bring people onto your site, well, that's the first step. Getting them from the site into the building is that much easier if people are used to coming here. Yes?
That's exactly what I was just thinking. So the signage in the front, the communication, it needs to be updated and it needs to be inviting. And also talking about the getting more young people into the church, just welcoming, maybe turning the building. That's not a right way to say it, but curb appeal. Make it welcoming, this is our space, draw them in, because right now we're kind of up and turn, and it kind of feels like a shoulder. I can imagine people might think that, but just that as a consideration, and maybe not as much lawn. I mean, let's use the space that we have.
Okay, so how people view and approach your building, how the public space interacts with the private space is incredibly important for getting people connected to you. And everything else, I think, will be noted. Okay. Yes, one more.
I just want to mention one thing. What about the deaf and hearing impaired people too? I got two of them, and they're at the Lloyd's house. What would happen if they couldn't go to the chairs and hear us, like the music?
Excellent. Thank you. So, as we provide in any of these categories for people of varying ability, we have to think about how people experience the message that you are bringing to them. If they can't see, if they can't hear, if they have difficulty navigating, if they have dementia or limited or varying capacity to understand space and message. If we truly believe that every person has value and every person should participate in what you are bringing to them, we've got to make sure we have the adequate avenues to address their needs. I had the first church ask about a place for autistic children 2 weeks ago. They want to welcome families that have that challenge. So, worship and music. Yes?
Two things. I do know there are some churches now whose sound systems can actually be worked with bell tone with the hearing aids.
Hearing loops?
Yeah, it works really, really good.
Yep.
The other one is more of a physical thing. With having a chirp with like braid, it's actually hard on joints, backs, all of that. So as we age, I mean, even I, after standing an hour, can tell that you're standing on your toes, not yes. Plus, with the way our benches are, with the backs broken open, I mean, I have 3 kids. Their coats are always falling on the feet of the people behind me. I mean, and toys, everything. It kind of gets frustrating. It'd be nice to have a solid structure to sit on.
Great. So a couple comments. One about the incline. That is often a challenge for people as they age, or for some people that have joint issues. Getting pews that maybe minimize the children. I was at a church service once where it was really quiet in the middle of the pastor's message, and a marble rolled off of the pew and then rolled all the way down to the front. And then using technology to bring message to people is not a bad thing, and the hearing loop is something that can easily accommodate somebody with a hearing challenge. Yes?
I'd like the music to be kind of on display as itself, not blended in with all the rest of the pews and the people sitting behind it and things.
Okay.
More predominant.
So let me make sure I'm understanding. So getting the choir or the source of music, whatever is providing that message on a Sunday, to feel like it is a part of the whole worshiping community?
No, so it's part of the community, but there's not, like right now we have people sitting in pews behind our choir.
I get it.
The choir is just kind of...
So it's almost the opposite of that, of saying we need a space that the music ministry feels like they are in a position of leadership and not buried in a place that they don't have the right presence to be able to be an active part of liturgy. Got it. Yes?
And then you have the accessibility area of getting up to the where the worship service is taking place. I notice some of our readers are having challenging walking up the steps right now.
And in existing buildings, it's always a challenge. Accessibility issues, we did not build church buildings usually prior to the 2000s. Sometimes in the 1990s as ADA became more of an issue, but we really have not been friendly with our buildings for people that want to serve and need access. There's another, yes?
I've been to churches where they put the music up on behind, like a couple weeks ago when you did the diocesan services, you had the screen. But I've been to a couple, and I know my mother-in-law, when she was in her late 80s, early 90s, really liked that because she had trouble reading the book, and it's up there in the baby with the white and the words. And even one of the churches even has prayers so that people are getting.
So the comment is, we have the ability now to use screen technology to facilitate hymn singing at worship. Now, I got to be careful about that because digital technology varies in acceptability from diocese to diocese. Sometimes it is allowed, sometimes it is not allowed, and sometimes it is helpful for some things and not helpful for other things. So, but digital technology is a tool that we can use in appropriate ways, right, in acceptable ways, to bring the message and to strengthen the celebration in our church buildings. Yes?
I'd just like to give a shout out to our music program. For a church of our size, we have been so blessed for many years and continue to be blessed with a wonderful music program and liturgy directors and so forth. And I say, give them whatever they need.
I was a little disappointed when I came to church today because I thought maybe I would hear a choir, but
5 o'clock last night.
that's okay. I don't expect this is probably the last time I'll be worshiping with the church, so I'll get the music ministry a little more expanded on another visit. Yes, way in the back.
I am part of the environment team here at St. Olaf's, and I would like to see sanctuary a little bit larger so that I don't have to worry about Father Vince taking down my lilies. And it's definitely challenging to make the worship space beautiful with flowers, especially for the larger holy days when we're so spaced with people up there and we have to worry about, the servers dodging through this and carrying things, and just those bigger sanctuaries.
The environment of worship is incredibly important as a church that moves through seasons. If we understand the year of the church, the year of the church is a journey, what environment does is it helps underscore where we're at on that journey. And if there's inadequate space, that's difficult to do. I've worked in churches that were overly large, and so there wasn't the ability to really do kind of scaled environment. So all of that needs to be a part of the consideration as we evaluate how well a sanctuary serves the people of the church.
I'm assuming one last thing is, I think I would like more lighting in the church. But my other concern is if we're trying to keep to the Norwegian history of the area, do we get rid of the dark wood that's in there as well?
So the comment is about trying to lighten up the church and the need to lighten up the church and the challenges of the existing wood ceiling and church environment that, that has some history for the church, but may also pose challenges for bringing light and liveliness in the worship. Yes?
I'd like to see a better presentation for the baptism. Right now they pull it to the front of the altar, and I imagine that going over sometime.
So better provisions for the font and making sure it's safe and convenient and present as a symbol for the church. Yes?
I know I heard someone just mutter it, but I had the same thought. The long-standing tradition is to put the font at the front of the church, or in a baptistry, which I don't think we're going to put a baptistry in, it would be nice. I think if you have the font at the front of the church, yeah, between the narthex and the nave, put a great big font right there where everybody can see it. All you have to do is turn around.
So the comment is just on the placement of where the font occurs. What's always interesting to me is very often for baptisms, for actual baptisms, the churches desire the font to be up front where everyone can see. But the actual baptismal experience in a lot of churches is relatively infrequent. And if that symbol is only in the front, it doesn't afford a lot of people the opportunity to daily renew the promise that they're given in baptism. When they walk into the church, that they're able to cleanse themselves. Even when there's not a baptism, we ought to be reminded of our baptism and the promise that we're given at that time. And so placement, there's lots of different places you can put fonts, but placement matters. It sends a message about that symbol, about its centrality to our lives as Christians that are born in water. Yeah. Oh, that wasn't the question. Okay. Yes?
To piggyback on the baptismal font, I noticed there's photos of the granite font, the water running over, and I know one of the churches in the area has that. I don't know if it's annoying to anyone else to hear this water running when I'm for a multitude of reasons, you know, you have to run to the bathroom because you have water, or it's just annoying that it's taking away from what's being said in the church and what's really happening, because you're constantly annoyed by the running water.
It's always a challenge. I've done a lot of churches with fonts, the flowing fonts and fonts that overflow into an immersion pool. Giving consideration to how quiet they are is something that I've learned over years. If I went back to some of my earlier fonts, they're probably noisier than they need to be. Or the ability to have them noisy when you need them noisy, right? Because that can be inviting for people coming in, but during the worship, it may be a distraction. So balancing that with font language is something that we need to think about. Yes?
I just want to say, I find it the opposite. It's the living water renewal. I look forward to spring, even when we're using an old cow tank or whatever up front and surrounding. You know, back in the day, I find that renewing. So.
Right. Good. Are we there, Leroy? Okay. So, family information. Ideas, comments, challenges regarding, and by formation, if you're not used to every church talks about education or learning experience differently. So that's what I mean by formation. How do we form people in understanding their faith and the history and the ministry or outreach of the church? Yes?
Enough space for all our classes.
Okay, enough space for classes. Yes?
I think we need to have like a Sunday school or something for littles that really don't get much out of church because they're poking mom and dad, asking for Cheerios and a book. And mom and dad don't get a lot
with either because they're constantly switching books. So I think a Sunday school or something like that to add in with our faith formation classes.
So it's a good question about how we provide opportunities for children in the church. Whether that's in worship, whether that's outside of worship. I usually say, parenting, by that I mean all ages, but specifically young kids. Every parent and every child has different needs. There is probably not a silver bullet that tackles all of those needs of children. And what that means for people in worship. Where I was sitting, I don't have kids of my own, where I was sitting, I was behind a child that was playing with his dad's hair during worship. Was that you? I found that an encouraging and beautiful experience in worship. You might see, I don't have kids and I don't have hair, so this was something hopeful for me. But that's what I'm getting at, is the needs of every family, every child, every parent, every visitor is going to be different. And if we just provide one opportunity, if all we do is provide a cry room or a nursery in this case, have we met the needs of everybody? Because my worship experiences were enriched by that. Yes?
Going along with what she's saying, there's another parish in the area that they do, I think it's like kids liturgy. So like 15 minutes in, they take them away to a big gathering room. And to her point, I think it's like anywhere from age 2 to 10. Because we do still have CCD at night for older kids. So it's nice for us to actually be able to listen and not be distracted by one.
So being able to provide an opportunity where children can still participate in the liturgy of adults so that they start to understand that, but can also have something that addresses their need for liturgy as well. Because everyone needs liturgy. I mean, needs that kind of experience, right? But we all, at different ages, different abilities, understand it connects with us in different ways. And children need it as well as adults. Yes?
We used to have babysitting during our Mass. It would be nice to be able to have a room assigned for something like that again, so the parents can really get more out of the Mass if they want to.
So again, a comment about it may be helpful for some families to be able to take a child to a place where a nursery or a place of where they don't have to be the parents, so that they can incorporate what's happening in worship without having to tend to kids. Again, every parent is a little different in what they need. I'm not a parent, but I've watched sisters raise children, and parenting is hard. And part of the Sunday experience for some parents is not having to parent, right? So providing that full breadth of service to parents may be helpful. Yes?
I think pulling kids out in the middle of the liturgy is theologically unsound. Let the little children come to me. And when Christ is present, flesh and blood, on the altar, telling the kids, you can get up and leave, it's all right, nothing important is going on here. They're going to carry that into their adulthood. The crying of a baby is sweeter than the snoring of a saint. Let them cry, because they're there in the presence of God, and we ought to be teaching them how to behave in a church. Not that you can get up and leave just because it's inconvenient. Fulton Sheen, the great communicator that he was, had an anecdote from when he was teaching at the seminary in France. And he was in a church giving his homily, and a baby started to cry. And the mother got up to leave, and he stepped down from the ambo, and he said, no, come. And the woman turned around to him and said, Father, it's not because the baby's bothering you, it's because you're bothering the baby. And that should be the only reason you leave. It's not about our convenience and me getting something out of it, or anyone else getting something out of it. That's not what you're in church to do. We ought to be making sure that they're there to partake in the Mass and experience that so that they will carry it through for the rest of their lives.
So what we take away from your comment, and again, it's a little different than what we've heard from other people, but we respect all of those opinions. We have to figure out how we impart, how we create a worship experience that connects with everybody of every age, and how we impart that to younger generations in a full breadth of what it means to be the church. And how we include or not families in that ministry is a part of what we have to figure out, right? Because if people feel uncomfortable, they'll stop coming. Yes?
I'm not sure exactly how this fits, but we need to provide opportunities for service. And if it's a structural thing that gets people involved, or formation that gets people involved, we've lost our sophomores and juniors because we don't have confirmation anymore at that age. Harder to get them involved in service. So service needs to be a central focus of what we do.
So the spaces that you create, and part of what you have to think about as a church, is how do you challenge people to understand that their life of faith is directly connected to building and improving the earth in which we live. I mean, part of that, I mean, it's one of the things I love about the Catholic Church is the history of social programs, food pantries, meal programs, clinics, all of that is a part of what it means to be Catholic. And how do you get people connected to that of every age? And if you're going to provide those ministries, how will your buildings promote those ministries? Because I think one of the challenges with a lot of social ministries is we're asking volunteers and leadership to provide those in less adequate spaces, and maybe even patrons too, in less adequate spaces that make it inconvenient. And the minute it starts being hard and you feel like you're swimming against the tide, that all stops. Yes, one more.
Pertaining to all these needs and wants, we have space everybody wants, I can see the cost of this thing just escalating. I would think one of the considerations, and maybe they already have, which the committee would do, is see about kicking out the daycare facility. And you could create a teen room, you could create a nursery or other spaces for people to use, so you don't have to constantly redo this room for a number of different functions.
So there's two things I want to pull out of that comment. Number one, you've got a lot of space. Figuring out how to make it all usable is always a challenge, right? And what the best use is. The second thing that I heard in your comment that I think is worthy of voicing is, I'm fully aware as an architect working with churches that we do not have unlimited budget to do whatever we need to do, to build more building needlessly. Most churches have to think about how do we make our churches flexible enough that they can serve a variety of different needs without having to just build more space. So, ministry and office spaces, which is kind of related, right? I mean, we've been talking a little bit about social ministries or outreach ministries. So that's this topic for your church, office ministries, and for your social ministry programs. What is needed, wanted, hoped for?
Do we have enough office space?
I'll find that out in a couple weeks. So, do we have enough office space is a great question. Was there another? No, we don't. One of the things that's changed dramatically from 1992 when I started to now, the size of church staff used to be very small. In most churches now, it is incredibly large and complex. And I think that's a good thing, right? It relieves priests to be able to do what priests have to do, to have other staff that support the ministries of the church. And it also connects people in different ways and with different talents that are useful. But you have to have the adequate space to be able to provide support for those people. Leroy.
I think in the general gathering space, it'd be good to have some common office space. I'm going to say it's kind of like a conference room that would be used for many things. But we don't have anything like that right now.
So a space that's dedicated for use, sometimes by staff, sometimes by parishioners, that is available to be able to do the work of the church, apart from offices or classroom. So a general meeting room or a multi-use meeting room. Yes?
Not just, meeting rooms are great, but when family comes in for me to meet with, or whether it's a couple or an individual, to have kind of a individual room that's warm and welcoming for that purpose.
So a room that is useful for the things that need to be more compassionate and private. Oftentimes, churches might have a counseling room that's set up to be a place of comfort. Bride's room, grieving family room, not a grieving family room, but a grieving room for families. All of those things have to be considered as a part of the outreach and support for ministering to families. We've started to see the building of smaller offices, and then instead of doing counseling in offices, there's actual counseling room that can be scheduled. That way, every office doesn't have to have that kind of a room. And then we can make that room private, convenient, and safe. So we can make it not have to worry about personal safety or litigation or liability of staff, things like that. So comment back here, yes?
I think another item, if we're going to, let's say, utilize this building, we have to consider right now the leasing, or I should say, one place is leasing some space, which is income to the parish as well. We have to consider that as well.
So how do you expand your ministries in this building and acknowledging that there are ministries here that provide a source of income and connection, right? So the benefit beyond money from those ministries or those programs is they bring outside community that otherwise might not come into your building. They connect your parish to those people as well.
I think there's another space that could be helpful, and that's something that you offer to the community. That we're, right now, for instance, I live in a condo association, and we're always looking for places to have our condo meeting. Okay, we go to, right now, we're going to different churches, but they're not the Catholic ones right now to do that. But I think that would be an important space from a community standpoint.
So making sure that the church not only connects with community, but there may be benefit in providing a place for the community that the community can use. I had a project once that didn't know how they were going to build. Actually, they had a gym that was underused, and they needed to renovate it for a fellowship hall for them, but they didn't understand how they were going to be able to afford that. But we designed it so that it could be rented to the community because the community had a tremendous need for medium-sized venues for small groups and small weddings. And so we found the best use to be able to provide income, but also that would help provide the need that they had for the church. Yes?
Beyond the income of it, being involved in a variety of things in the broader Deforest community, I'm very conscious of the fact that we don't welcome nonprofit groups or other organizations into our space unless our festival or the salad luncheon, we want them to come in and spend some money. You know, I feel like that's not a good face to put on in the community.
So in other words, beyond what there might be as far as rental, you have an obligation to serve the community in which you exist and reach out to, and
I know it's tricky to
Yeah.
balance that,
Yeah.
but I don't know, I just would like to see if that can be explored, that there be ways that now and then. I mean, years and years ago, our 4-H club was able to do an awards banquet here without having to rent the space. We're a local nonprofit, it's an educational program, we were able to use the space, but that's long gone.
well, and some of that is if you have the space, figuring it out.
It's liability.
But figuring out as well, policy that respects variety of different abilities of groups. But ultimately, the question becomes, and I have a lot of people ask, you know, the church used to be the civic center of our society, it's no longer the case. Well, some of it is churches, I'm not saying all of it, some of it is churches have also closed their doors, right? And if you want to be the center or a present part of the community in which you reside, you have to be able to provide some service as a part of that as well. Yes?
I was wondering about the track lights for the office.
So providing good lighting or track lighting for the office? Did I get that correctly? Great. Thank you. We done, Leroy? Okay. So, anything else? Did I miss anything? No, I didn't. Anything else that you couldn't find the right place? Now, I'm going to start this section by saying, I've yet to work with a church that had adequate storage. I could probably have a whole storage category on here, but for time's sake, we won't do that. But I'm fully aware, I'd be surprised if you have the storage that you need and want where it's most convenient.
When all is said and done, I would like to have the question answered, value added for whom at what cost?
So, as a part of the litmus test of discerning what we do, or what you do, I should say, I'm a part of this, I guess, as well, but what you do has to be who is served, what is needed, and
the value added.
Value added.
For whom?
For whom.
At what cost?
At what cost. I often talk to my clients about value because oftentimes the bottom line that people go right to is cost. But it has to be value, right? Nobody will pay for something that doesn't have value. So whatever this group does as a group, as a planning team, in the master plan, we have to tie it back to ministries and be able to show that there's value in whatever value add.
We already have value in what we do, with what we're adding.
If we add, but sometimes the things that you do also
maintain
have or have improvement, right?
Okay.
Women's toilet rooms, I've yet to show up at a church that had adequate women's toilet rooms, right? So they're there. Whether they function well is another matter. I'm not trying to single out the women, by the way. I'm just working from experience. Yes?
I'm not sure if the media is looking at enlarging a church. I don't know about that. My question is, do we know how many actual families? I think it used to be 600 or 600.
Over 900.
But with those 900 families, as you, when we have our festival, and the amount of tickets that are not picked up, not all of these families are using our church. And I guess I'm worried about us expanding a church for 900 families that don't show up.
Okay, so the comment is, first a question, how big is the church? Father provided an answer, 900 families. And the concern is, if we are expanding the church, and I'm not sure that we know that yet, but if we are expanding the church, given the connection that people show in participation of things like the festival and things like that, are we enlarging it just to enlarge it, and why? What is that a good value added from that standpoint? And let me just say again, I haven't started my work yet, so I have no idea what your project is going to look like or what the needs are. That's part of why we're starting here. I'll know a lot more in a couple weeks, and I'll know quite a bit more by the end of the summer. But part of that challenge, or in part of that is a challenge, right? It's understanding why people don't participate. Is it because they're not able? Is it because the church isn't challenging them in ways that they can? Are they distracted enough by life? And sometimes that's a realistic consideration, but I think for the committee, part of this is discerning, how do we connect people better? And will that lead to results of the church having more vibrant participation? And will it prepare for a new generation or for people moving into your community that now will need a place to feel connected to the church?
Well, what I worry about is this is going to cost a great deal of money. As was mentioned, are we going to get value for the money? And if our community is growing, and our church has 900 families, but maybe only 500 families really come to church, not just Easter and Christmas. That's a lot of money spent on making new spaces and growing all sorts of different things for people who aren't coming. So that's a concern of mine that I hope the community will address.
Yeah, it's a good concern. I think in asking that question, oftentimes leads to a better project and more meaningful space as well. Yes?
One comment. I just hope that when you take all this into consideration, you don't do anything to what was all fixed up, the blue sky that we just went through a year ago. We said that is, I've had so many people, my son, who's in Appleton, other people that I talked to that come to our church and think that is fantastic the way that that lightened up the whole church.
So there's a certain amount on every project. It's good to know that because there's a certain amount on every project. There's some place, architects I call it the holy cows, the things that if we touch them, we're in trouble. Right? I want to know where the landmines are before I get started. Doesn't mean I'm not going to go through the mine path. I just want to know when I'm going to explode, right? Understanding the things that are near and dear, or the things that recently the church has invested resource in, and because it's so near or so current, we have to pay careful attention to whether it will feel like we've undone something that has invested in or cherishes. Sometimes it's a money issue, sometimes it's emotional or spiritual investment. But understanding where those things are is incredibly important. Anything else?
Sure.
Yes.
First of all, I want to thank you for your presentation today. I think it's extremely worthwhile.
Great, thank you.
I almost missed it, but I'm glad I came to be here. And as a longtime parishioner here, I'm very encouraged by most of the thoughts expressed. And something you said early on about Walmart and skylights got me to thinking about the church as a business. Up until about 25 years ago, I spent in the media a lot of time with businesses. And we are a business. And there's a need which we we provide. But we're in a phase now, it's called merchandising. And merchandising is simply making a service or a product as attractive as possible for individuals to want to have. And I think this whole project falls into the area of merchandising. And we need to focus on that. Because the future of the church, as you said, is with the young people. And in some cases, personally, I'm thinking we're not attractive enough. The physical plant is extremely important. If the physical plant is there, not there, nobody's going to want to come in. And I think we have to be concerned about that, and the committee's got to look at that as a chief priority.
So let me do a little bit of spin on that. Just a little careful spin. I don't think we're in disagreement. I would say that there is so much that the church can learn from retail and the successes of retail, from education and the successes of education, from farming and care, or custodial care of environment, and how you make things grow, how you're friendly. We can learn from community organizations. What you said about, so whether we call a church business, institution, however we describe it, part of the reason that you're a church and you're here is there is a great need in the human family, in church and out of church, for care, for support, for meaning, for education, for spirituality. And part of what we're doing is trying to figure out how you provide that in a way that is relevant and accessible to your members and to the people outside of your church. Whether it's reaching out, whether it's bringing them in, however you connect. The church has a truth that is ages old. And society has always struggled with how you make that inform and change the human condition. Your building is a part of that, but it's not all of that. But that's what we're about, is having you understand and relay what that is and how that needs to unfold here. So with that, let me just tell you a little bit where we're headed. It's actually in 2 weeks I've got a walkthrough of the buildings to see exactly what's here. I've done a little bit of understanding of that, but not a lot. To really understand the condition of spaces, the condition of the building, what spaces are here, what's provided. I also on that day will be talking to a number of the leaders who conduct ministry programming in your building to understand in greater detail what works, what doesn't work. And out of that and this visioning then, I'm able to come back to the planning team with a list of what people have said are needs, what I've observed based on my experience, what leadership has told us, what the actual stuff is that's here. So quantifying how much education space do you have, how much office space do you have, what's the number of offices, how much parking, all of that. And using all of that information, putting together a number of options that hopefully will lead the church by the fall to be able to say back to this community of the church, here's what our recommendations are, here's what our thoughts are, this is a potential first step, this is a potential first step. We never know when we set out the master plan how much people are going to be able to want or afford. What I want to make sure is whatever you do along the way, if it's big or if it's small, that it is contributing to something that is a future that is meaningful for you. I've had churches that have spent $10 million, and I've had churches that have spent $10,000. the value in any of that is how well it serves your programming and does it lead you to another step. Because I've yet to have a church that said, oh, spend what you want. I'm still looking. And then we will bring things back, right, to the larger group to confirm that what you have said and what your leaders have said and what the perceived need is, that it's in line with where the church, what the church can support. Whether that's spiritual support or financial support or emotional support or sweat equity, whatever that is. That's kind of the game plan. Nothing is decided now. And while we hope to put up a roadmap of where the church may go to the future, it's up to you what we do, ultimately. And maybe up to the future what we do. Because hopefully the master plan will look beyond 2 years or 5 years or 10 years to be able to say, our church is going to be here, vibrant and relevant in 50 years and in 100 years. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Father, who wanted to close us with some remarks and prayer. Thank you so much for today. I'm always encouraged. Thank you. I'm always encouraged by the participation of communities working toward a common end. And I love getting to meet new families of the church and figure out how you move forward. Thank you.
First, I wanted to thank everybody for taking the time to come and for such a respectful conversation. It's really refreshing to hear all the people's different ideas about things. You know, I've been thinking about this for a little bit of time, and there's a whole bunch of ideas that never entered into my brain, you know, as a result of this. I just need you to know that nothing at all has been decided yet. This is still blue sky, right? Yeah, everybody's got ideas. I have ideas. But that doesn't mean that anything is headed in any particular direction. We're going to let the facts and our needs and everything else decide which way we're going to go. We just have to get going on this a little bit early because we know what's happening in our community, right? For whatever reason, you know, just looking at the two communities that surround us, Wanakee and Sun Prairie, right? And it's all moving our way. You know, we just went through this $125 million referendum for the school district. Why? Because more families are moving into the area, right? That's increasing on us. I'll tell you something I haven't really told anybody yet. When I got named to become pastor here, and I was talking to Father Rob on the phone, and I was talking to him about, you know, the schedule and whatnot, and, you know, he told me that he had a 4-mass schedule every weekend, okay? That is not normal for priests to do, okay? And the two parishes I'd been at before, Sacred Hearts and Maria Gretti, both had 4 masses, but they also had 2 priests. And the weekends, you know, when somebody was on vacation and you had to cover all 4 of those, I'm telling you, you're out of gas at the end of that. And I'm like coming in here going, I gotta do that every weekend? And so I asked him on the phone, I go, is there any way really of combining that? You know, of combining a couple of masses and dropping it down to 3? You know, is it possible to maybe not have the 7:30 and do an 8:30 and try to figure out whether or not we could do that and combine that? He's like, well, that might be possible. When I got here, I kind of looked at it, it was like, well, it might be possible. That is no longer possible, okay? There have been changes here, whether you've seen that or not, or been witness to that or not, we are growing, okay? So that's a good thing.
This is a good problem to have. Many churches do not have this problem. Our structure though was built for a different time. And we got to honor that. It was very different in 1974 than it is today. They did the best they could with what they saw and what they knew at the time. But things change. You know, Paul mentioned that at the very beginning. Things change, needs change, environment changes. It's time for us to take another fresh look at things and to see what do we need now. And as we look to some number of years in the future, what does that mean to us here in this community? So I just wanted to kind of lay that out. You know, we're not, trying to rush out in order to build stuff for that purpose. We're really wanting to look holistically at our needs and then try to make the best decisions that we can for our future, of this parish going forward. That's really what we're about. Nothing's decided yet. We need your input to get there. And this was great feedback today. I mean, I sincerely appreciate that. One of the things I didn't put out there mainly because I wanted you to be here. As you see Adam sitting behind this little video camera. We are going to put it out. It's going to be put onto YouTube and then linked to Facebook so that people that weren't here can see it. I didn't want to give people an out, okay? That's why I didn't tell anybody about it, because if I had said, about half of you would not have shown up, right? So this way, other people who really wanted to be here that couldn't will get an opportunity now to kind of witness the first part of the discussion, and then we're still going to be able to ask them for input over the next week or so. We're trying to keep the window a little bit short so that Paul has work to do and so that we can get through all of this. But there will be an opportunity for people who were not here today to still provide their own input and hear what you heard today too. So, all right. Does anybody have any questions or anything for me before I kind of close this with a prayer? Mary.
I'd like to mention that I've lived in Madison all my life. And as a youngster, I could see that there was a lot of farm space between Madison and Middleton. Then it was Middleton, it was Verona, and then, it's gone the full circle around Madison. And with the constant growing in Madison and looking at all the farmland that has been taken for new buildings, businesses, and housing, that Deforest is really the last of the cities around that first circle. And in another, I'm thinking it was just 30 years ago that there wasn't a stop-and-go light in Sun Prairie. So you can see what can happen in 30 years. So, and I do feel that it's going to continue going out. So I can see that we are growing. And just in the last years that I've been here, what has taken place between DeForest and Madison and all the building that's going on, and it's just, it's going to continue.
Father, what role will the new bishop and the diocesan level play in approving anything that we come up with, as far as the future?
The answer is yes. There is a diocesan building commission of which all of this will need to go through. In fact, just starting this process required their permission to do, okay? So they're aware that we're starting a master planning process, which, by the way, the end result of this first phase of this is a program, right? It's kind of a laying out, so it's paper. No spade of earth turns as a result of this first phase, okay? It gives us kind of a concept, a thing that we're moving forward to, okay? Trying to logically progress into whatever we want to be at the end. But so nothing happens as a result of this. It just gives us our roadmap as we go forward. So out of this then, hopefully we have whatever our phase one is of whatever this is. And that, then we start working again with the building commission and the next bishop, because by that point, he will be installed, and we'll be making the final decision as to what that means. So that means we have to have our ducks in a row. We have to kind of understand what's happening in the community, what we want, what not. You know, he's going to be providing, you know, we'll probably be one of the first ones that kind of come up against him. So we're going to learn what his view of things are, which will be interesting. But seems like a very reasonable man from what I can see so far, so I think things will be fine. But we, you know, they'll have their input based on other things too. They may have something like helping us to work on what the sizing should be based on what they see as the future. Because one of the things that's an input to that all is they have a knowledge of how they vision the parishes that surround us for the future. Or if they don't, they're going to take a look at it as a result of that. And how does that impact us going forward? Right? So they have an input to this process too, based on a larger picture. And so all of that has to become part of what we do. And in the end, it will be the bishop that decides or gives the final approval as to what will happen. Because he has the responsibility for all of it, and we're part of that picture.
When you say master site plan, and this might be more a question for you, what does that consist of? Are there architectural drawings? Is it just, here's your site, here's where I think you should put everything? Are there floor plans? What's a part of that?
The short answer to that is yes and no. So we also have to, if there are things that are priority or first step, we try to show those in a little bit more definition. Things that from a master planning point, somebody says, you know what, that's 25 years out. Does it really matter to draw what it looks like? Because sensibilities will be different at that point. So we try to balance first steps and long-term needs. I'm a fan of keeping things fluid, looking fluid, so that people, you know, I don't want to show you something and somebody goes, oh, you decide that that's what the cross there is going to look like. I want to make sure people understand it's all, until you take the next step of a first phase, it's all still in process.
You know, one of the things that we want to do is, right, make sure that, you know, we're looking at our entire footprint here holistically and making sure that the decisions that we make, you know, don't impact other decisions in the future. You know, so that we're utilizing all of our land in an appropriate way, that even if something else is coming later, that we don't park something on top of it now, then that becomes a problem as we go forward. That's why you do the whole master planning process in the first place, is to make sure that you're moving in a logical direction and you're not making mistakes that you then have to undo or something at a later point. So that's why we're kind of starting high level, and then we'll go start deeper dive into whatever's going to come first.
A number of years ago, we had the Priests for Our Future campaign, and this parish was extremely wonderful in what they donated. And I believe we went over goal, and some of those proceeds were due to come back to us. I don't know how that has to be used, if it's total parish discretion or whatever, but might some of those proceeds that come back be helpful in a future building program, or is it not to be?
That's what we took the money and put it into. So we're at the point now where we get 80% of the money back that goes into the Priests for the Future. But we're in the final year of that now, so that's one of those that, it's been nice getting those checks every quarter, but we've been putting them aside towards a future building campaign already. So that's what we had decided to do. But again, we're now in less than a year left in that, so that funding source will...
All good things come to an end.
All good things come to an end. Anybody else? All right, good. Again, thank you very much. Thought we'd close with prayer here. Let us pray. Dear God, we, the people of St. Olaf Catholic Church, are grateful for all the blessings that you have given our parish family through the years. We're thankful to all who have gone before us, who have supported our ministries, built our facilities, created the faith community we benefit from today. We recognize that we are the stewards of this legacy. We ask for your guidance in realizing our own obligations and opportunities as we help to shape the future of our parish. So we join together in worship, community life, Christian education, and service to those in need. Remind us that our mission is centered on Jesus Christ and on bringing the good news of salvation to the world. With great anticipation, we are beginning a new chapter in our history. May a spirit of cooperation and with generous hearts and minds ever fulfill our vision as we face the challenges that are ahead. We ask this through our risen Lord Jesus Christ, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen. Thank you all very much. Really appreciate your being here.